I'm going to pass you over to David now to show you a little bit about DaVinci Resolve, which is the software, the free software you can download from Blackmagic, which is will use the Blackmagic cars to give you a real-time output to screen, and lets you do the equivalent of Lightroom. Do anybody use Lightroom for their digital stills? It's the equivalent of that for video.
Whereabouts does this fit in when you're doing the editing? Do you do it after the edit or before?
It depends on, if you're using Blackmagic cameras, then this is a typical bit of footage from a Blackmagic camera filmed in the top quality, which is the DNG format. If you do it as a MOV file, it's a video clip. Just a clip, so that's easy. But if you do it as this kind of format, you end up with this, which is, each one of those is a frame of video, and it saves a bunch of stills with a WAV file. So that doesn't go into most editing programs. So it won't go into Edius. It is just starting. They've just added it into Premiere Pro CC. You can take it directly into that.
You can't edit it, bring it in as a sequence.
No, you can't bring it in as. There's a way of bringing it in as an image sequence into Edius, but it's not very good. So you wouldn't do it.
No.
So if you filmed in the QuickTime formats, like on the small camera and the stuff that some of the stuff we've shown you was the QuickTime, you just bring them in and use them. But if you filmed it on DNG format, then you've got to convert it into something that you can use first. So then you come into Resolve, you convert it to something, you take it to your editing program, you do your editing, and then you send it back, and then you finish it off.
You finish it off in DaVinci?
Yeah. Now, you don't have to. You could just finish it all in Edius. You could just take the stuff, make it usable, put a basic look on it, so stop it being flat and make it reasonably good. Then take it into Edius. You could do everything inside of Edius. You wouldn't have to go back. But if you go back to Resolve, you can do more with it.
So can you, if you're exporting it from Edius back into Resolve, you're putting it in as a movie file at that point, aren't you?
You export it as a cut list, basically an EDL, and then when you bring it back into DaVinci, you then reconnect to the original clips rather than the temporary ones.
Right.
Okay. And that's this is where most of the hassle lies in using DaVinci, is getting stuff backwards and forwards.
Right.
It's like if you've done an edit inside of Edius and you put 15 titles on it and then you put some transitions and effects on it and everything else, all that disappears when you go back to Resolve.
But what you can do, of course, is you can sort of pre-grade, just like you might work in Lightroom before you export your JPEGs. You can work in DaVinci, so you get the look and feel of all your clips, and then export them as a finished, still a high bitrate clip into Adobe afterwards. So you don't have to recalibrate them.
The job I was just doing, which was Doctor Who science fiction movie. Basically, I started off by making up some temporary files, taking them to Edius and filling. Some of the stuff I just graded in Edius, and I actually was quite happy with the result. It's just that I went and did the same thing in Resolve, and I got a better result. So you could. It depends. You can put the effort in. You don't have to put the effort in.
Right.
I could have just filmed the whole stuff as MOV files. I'd have the benefit of more dynamic range and everything else, less compressed image, and then just to use Edius afterwards. But you're not getting the best out of the camera, which is what the point of Resolve is. Also, you don't have to use Resolve just because you're using the Blackmagic camera. You could use it for anything.
Exactly.
You could be quite happily editing on ABC HD, and then you've got to take it out of that, finish it off in Resolve. And you'd bring it into this, you'd do your colour correction and grading, and then you'd send it back and then put your titles on and then make a movie out of it. And they say the advantage is you can just do more with it.
And the cost, if you're not getting a Blackmagic...
There's a free version. There's a free version which does everything up to full high definition. So it's everything up to 1920, 1080. No watermarks, no time limit, nothing else. There's a paid version which is 600 quid, and that lets you do 3D, it lets you do up to 4K. It also
that's
adds
the one that comes bundled with this £1,200 camera.
But the free version does tons of stuff. It's amazing for a free program.
HD?
It does HD, yeah. So you could go home, download it, and start using it. It's very good, although it is a grading program, it's not an editing program, so the first thing you're going to do is start scratching your head as how do I do this, how do I do that. So there's a little bit of learning to do.
And it's free, so don't ask us.
On top, there are a lot of stuff on YouTube. Well, I was going to do some I was actually going to do some tutorials and put on my website, but I hadn't done them yet because there was a new version coming out, version 10, which is now out and finished, and so I was going to do some based on that. Problems you got with it are it doesn't accept lots of types of files. It doesn't like AVI files. So basically, if you've captured everything as Canopa's AVI files and things, and you want to get into this, you've got to convert it to something else. It likes MOV files, but it doesn't like all types of MOV files. Now at the moment, it doesn't like Canopus MOV files, which would be the best things you'd like to use with Edius, because you pull up an export thing, export them as Canopus MOV, bring it in, you know you've got decent quality. That is hopefully going to change, because I was talking to some people at IBC who said, yeah, the Grass Valley engineers and the Blackmagic engineers are talking to each other now about that, so maybe they'll change that in the future. So right now what I do is if I've got an ordinary edit, I will convert it to Avid format, which is a free codec that I've got, bring it into here, and then grade it, and then send it back again. If I'm using Blackmagic, then I use the Blackmagic files. So what you've got in here, this is also, it is now, the latest version, version 10, has got editing built into it. Now we're quite happy that the editing is not that comprehensive, because frankly if you had a free editing program that did good colour correction and titles and everything else, that's not a very good idea for people selling editing programs.
There goes the pension.
But yeah, so basically this is the program. Now download it and install it. It needs a decent graphics card, because all the work's done on the graphics card. So it needs a fairly modern NVIDIA card, and it will work on current modern ATI cards. It's Windows 7 only. Actually, I've used it on Windows 8 as well, but nothing, not XP, Vista, nothing like that. And it has 64-bit, so you have to have a fairly modern computer, and you have to have a fairly good graphics card in it, otherwise it won't run at all.
Can you download it on one kit and then
Yeah.
take it across?
Yeah, it's just a file you don't have to activate it or anything. There's no serial numbers. You can download it wherever you feel like. They'll ask you for your name, address, telephone number and things like that if you're downloading the free version. Now, since I'm a dealer in the Brighton area, you know, they'll give those names and addresses to me if they want anybody around here to be contacted.
Actually don't.
And nobody has.
They've never ever.
They've never done anything with it.
Done anything with the database from DaVinci. Nobody has.
So in other words, if you give the details in, you're not going to have any comeback on it.
Yeah.
And if it is, it will probably be me, because you know I'm in the dealer in the local area. But yeah, so yeah, just go in there, download it, and then use it. Once you've installed it, then you'll come into DaVinci. Now there's a bit of faffing around to do with setting it up. So for example, very quickly you've got to come into the preferences and you've got to add in all the hard drives that you want to use. You can't just load a clip from a hard drive, you've got to add it into this bit of it. There's a few other things, but again I really want to talk about what you can do with it rather than the whole setting it up. So first of all, you start off here, and this is actually showing you all the clips that I've got on the hard drive that I could possibly use. So some of this stuff is the train footage that we've been fiddling with, some of it is the QuickTime movies. It just shows you the clips, you can scrub across it, you can have a look at it, and then you just drag it and scrub it into the folder, into the project down here. I've put in a couple of different bins here, so just like everything else you've got a project folder. So now I've got the clips in, the next thing I'll do is I'll come into the Edit tab, and then I can make up a new timeline, and then start dragging stuff onto it.
Just show them how you make up a new timeline, because it's what everybody does when they first open this packet with this software version 10. They can't do it.
Alright, come up to where it says timelines, right click, create new timeline.
That's the one thing that will stump you.
Really? Well, I think it's because in version 9 it automatically created a timeline, whereas this doesn't.
I did have to hunt for it.
Yeah.
And then you can take your clips and start throwing them down here. And then you've got, clips one after the other. This is where it becomes an editing program, because you can trim clips. You can have different tracks, so if I add in another video track, I can put another clip on top of it. If you click on this little button here, you can get to a bunch of different effects. So there are things where you can, zoom into it. Where am I on that one?
And because this cinema camera shoots at, remember I said 1300 by about 2400 pixels, so higher than high def. You can crop into it afterwards and not lose any quality. So,
particularly on the shoot I just did, there was a couple of occasions where I crossed the line, so I had to actually flip people horizontally, and they had partings, so I managed to crop it so I couldn't see the parting. It is very useful to be able to film on bigger than high def. Richard didn't mention, but there is a 4K version of that camera coming out as well. Although you're not likely to see it this year, are you?
no, I don't think so.
But the 4K one, how much is that? It's like £3,000, isn't it?
2,700 plus VAT. Yeah.
So it's a 4K version of that cinema camera.
And it's a larger sensor. It's a 35mm, so it has much less of a crop factor. So it's the same size as C100, C300, and it's also a global shutter, which means you won't have any rolling shutter issues, which is very interesting. But again, 24, 25 and 30p, and no faster frame rates.
But essentially, as I say, this is you've got a timeline where you can trim stuff, you can edit stuff. It's okay. but I found that I wasn't, I was much happier editing in Edius or Premiere or whatever than I was in here. Mainly I think the editing side of this is, you're going to bring an edit in from something else, and if you're using an EDL or an AFF, sometimes they go wrong, they're not exactly right, and therefore you have to tweak them a bit. And now we've got the ability to tweak them and make it correct rather than being a bit of a mess. But actually, probably if you're coming in from Edius, what you're going to do is you're going to export what's called an AAF file. Now, specifically if you're coming in from Edius, the best thing is just to have an edit on one track. Don't have multiple tracks, have it all on one track. You export an AAF, and as you're doing that, you get it to convert it to QuickTime as you do it. Then you load it up and it comes in as an edit with all the bits on the timeline. Then what you do is you do your grading, and then you make another file and send it back to Edius. And the best way to do that is a thing called an XML. Just to be difficult, the XMLs that come out of this don't go into Edius, so you run through another program somebody on the Grass Valley forums wrote that fixes it.
And you can see now why these look terribly attractive for lots of purposes, but sometimes these are really your weapon of choice for having a life.
Well, I haven't got a life, so I'm quite enjoying using it. The point is that, I mean, it's a camera sort of intended for filmmakers, for movie makers. The guy I was making this with, he specifically wanted to do this because he really wants to make feature films. So he's a sort of semi-pro, does a lot of wedding videos and everything else, and he still uses his trusty HDV camera for that. But for this, for his feature film, he wanted something that looks like film. And we did the filming with this, we've done the grading with this. It looks much better than it would have done on the other camera. We've got decent depth of field out of it.
A shallow depth of field, which is debatable whether that's good or bad.
Well, it makes it look a lot more film-like.
Flavour of the month, though.
And even
it has been for a long time.
yeah, but it does look better. And there are things like on the grading side of it. This particular shot here, for example, we filmed that with a blue light and an orange light on it to try and give it sort of a nice look to it. I can do whatever I like with that particular shot, and I'll show you that in a second. I can take it to completely normal and all the way up to having all the colouring that I want in it. And so I've got that latitude to play around with it and actually make it look like how I want it. That he was saying when he looked at some of the shots we did in really low light, there was noise on it, but it looked like film noise. It didn't look like the kind of noise we get off a camera.
Completing DVs.
Yeah, it just, it looks better. There's just no doubt about that. But it is more effort. Now, as I say, if you just want to grade your ordinary stuff, you can do lots of stuff in Edius, and have a look at those tutorials I mentioned where they do explain a huge amount of stuff you can do in Edius you never believe you possibly could. But you could do it better in this. But it's more faff. Now, so for example, I've got this shot here, which is just, I was just trying out my camera, which has got a narrow depth of field on it, and my lens, and just doing a quick focus between the different bits of the plants there. If I go to this shot, and I'm going to reset everything. So, if I start off with just taking that particular shot there, there's various tabs down here, and the first one is just sort of particular camera settings. So if I've just brought in a clip from Edius, then you wouldn't have this. But because I've got a camera, there are specific settings for that, where you can have settings for Arri Alexas and settings for Red cameras, or in this case, settings for the Blackmagic camera. So I could just sort of automatically put a look on it, and then instantly you've got something where it's a bit punchy and a bit nice. It's actually, that look tends to blow out the whites a little bit. But if all you wanted to do was get something that you can edit, and you didn't want to use something that looks really flat, then all you do is you kind of come in here, whack that on it, or you can even set that as the default. Then you pop over to the delivery tab, you choose the kind of format that you want to make up, which is very probably going to be some kind of Avid format, which is sort of the simplest thing to get to and from this into other programs. And the Avid codecs are free, so it's easy to download. Then you knock it up, you have a bunch of files, you then take that into Edius, you do your editing, and then you send it back afterwards and you reconnect to the original stuff. So it could be as simple as that to start off with, and then at the end you send it back here and then you faff around with it. Or, in this kind of colour tab here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it really flat. So I've put it on the BDM film is basically the flat mode. Now you notice there's total difference there between really blue and orange, which is how it was filmed, to completely flat and hardly any blue cast across it whatsoever, with exactly the same shot. Then I'll come into here and I've got all these different things to fiddle around with it. So for a start, you've got colour wheels, a bit like the colour wheels in Edius, where you can grab hold of them and move them around. They only move very small amounts which is what they're meant to do, because you're always making very subtle corrections here. This is not coming in and taking shot which is really overly, shot completely wrongly. This is subtle changes to make it look a bit better. Generally what I do is I hit the automatic button for a start, which will then at least set the levels so the brightest bits as bright as possible and the darkest bits as dark as possible, and then I'll start fiddling around with it. But actually probably what I do is, rather than start fiddling with it from there, I would do what's called adding a node onto it, which is a bit like a layer. Filters, you have different filter layers. Nodes is how this does it. So I added a node, and I'll actually do the colour correction on that node and sort of maybe make that a bit bluer, add in a bit of saturation, change a bit of contrast. You can change the pivot on the contrast so you can get a bit more punch to it. You can drag down the blacks, change the mid-tones. You've got controls here that do that. You've got similar kind of controls here which do exactly the same thing. So you can just shove your cursor over that and that will make the mid-tones a bit lighter or the mid-tones a bit darker. And then I've got one look on there, I'll add another node onto it, and then with that other node I might do something like put a mask onto it. So I've just gone for a square mask. Why did I go for a square mask? I'm going to go for a round mask, and I'm going to put that over mark and say, right, on that particular bit what I want to do is I'm going to brighten him up quite a bit. Now I'm just doing something that's completely over the top, looks completely wrong. As you can see, it's all, I've done the wrong thing, but you get the idea that I can actually put a mask on somebody and let's just feather the edges a bit. And so now I've got something that's affecting a particular region, but that mask isn't moving. I actually want that mask to move and follow his head. Well, here's one I did earlier. So let's go back to that one. So what I'm going to do is do the same thing here, but I'm going to add a node onto it, and I'm going to do a mask which goes over this guy's head. Look down here, it'll be easier. I should be a bit quick on this, but anyway, you shove it on there. I'm right at the start of the clip. I'm going to go over to the tracking, and I'm going to say track that guy's head.
Give it a bigger track on his tie and then change the shape of it afterwards. I've done this clip lots.
Actually,
you can do.
I'm zooming in, by the way, by using the mouse wheel to just zoom in there.
There we go. Track his tie, but then it get the tracking for him right. That's it, a bit bigger, and then
bigger.
Then you can change it afterwards.
I actually normally do the head, but a bit smaller.
Right. All right, there you go. And then it's and then you can change it.
So
afterwards.
having tracked it,
motion to the rest of it.
And we've got the bit in the middle. So now I've actually got that, but now the area is tracking the guy's head. Of course I haven't done anything to it yet, so what I need to do is just put some sort of look on that.
And don't forget, this is free, which is quite something.
Yeah.
And I'm going to change the feather a bit.
And it's free, and if you use a Blackmagic card you're getting a real-time output to a big screen.
And there is nothing, there's nothing here which I've done which isn't in the free, is not in the free version. This is all part of the free version. So you see, I've done something which is just tracking his face. I've just made it black and white to make it obvious, but I've just done a mask there which has tracked his face. You see, when I started fiddling around with this, it's possible to completely lose your life to grading. I found by just fiddling and fiddling. But I started to look at that and I thought to on some of the other shots I was doing, I thought, looking at those shadows, I'd quite like it if those shadows weren't quite that yellow. So I came in and I put a qualifier on it, and in this case, let's just choose that colour there. And with a bit of fiddling here, I can change around, and where am I on the luminance there? So I'm just trimming it down to just the dark areas. I can do things like blur that as well, so it's not so harsh. But yeah, having done that, I can say, right, I don't like those being so yellow, so what I'm going to do is then come down here and add just maybe a bit of blue into that to get rid of it. So now I've changed the colour of the shadows, but I haven't changed the colour of everything else. You can put loads and loads and loads of these nodes on. You just keep adding a node and doing something. If you don't like it, then what you can do is you can either delete it or just turn it off and see what it looks like without it. You can get up a view where you can see the two things next to each other, so you can compare shots, you can compare between different shots. You just get a lot more control over it than you do in an editing program. Now, a lot of this stuff actually looks fairly similar to it does in an editing program. Like I've got some curves controls here, you know, where you could just come in here. Now I'm just brightening up the shadows, which is obviously a stupid thing to do. So what I ought to have done is I ought to have added another node onto that, and then done something to brighten the overall image up. So you've got curves in there, which you do have in other programs. I actually tend not to use the curves myself. I tend to use mostly these things over here and the contrast and thing. But a lot of that comes down to just playing around with it and getting to know it. But you just do have an awful lot of control over stuff. Like I say, you've got these qualifiers where you can pick a particular colour. You know, you can do. It does actually have. Richard was talking about his wobbly shots with the Blackmagic Pocket camera. It has got an image stabilizer inside of it.
It's also the flow motion now, or the
So
slow motion.
Now, this I did have a plan to show that on.
The flower should be a flower grade.
We have bright corners.
So if I come down here and so here we have a shot, which is what I was doing earlier. That's a shot, it's HDV, and it was a shot that I exported out of Edius, and that's 20% slow motion. So if you've been using Edius, you know Edius does a pretty good slow motion, it's better than say Premiere does. When you get to 20%, that's what it looks like. Which is okay, and that's flame blended, but you know, it could be better. Now the way to get better slow motion is if you go to After Effects, or if you go to Boris Red, it's got better slow motion built into it. Well, if I come to this clip here, and let's whack that down to 20%. And I'm going to put that on good old optical flow. And that's the slow motion. It's a thing called optical flow, which is where it's supposed to be, you know, there's a frame blending thing which is like Edius. Now it's not perfect, and to be honest, if you went into After Effects, it would do a better job.
Number plates are a lot better.
Actually, my footage is interlaced, and I forgot to turn on the interlacing.
Oh.
That would help, wouldn't it? And I think I've got it set to progressive output.
That's better.
But imagine, this is 20% slow motion,
Yeah.
and you remember what the Edius one looked like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's better. This is also in the free version. So for anything, you could just download the free version. You can export a clip out of this, load slow motion down, send it back to Edius, and then you have better slow motion. You know, I've got some people using Edius for their skydiving videos, and they wanted a better shot of the people slowing down. They could use this without spending any money. Obviously, we want you to spend money as well, but they could use this without spending any money. The sort of things you get, as I say, if you go and you pay for it, you do get some extra stuff. So you do get some noise reduction, you get some temporal blur, and you also get the ability to do bigger than 4K footage and stereoscopic footage.
Where can they afford to produce this and give it away?
Well, what happened?
Bought it cheap.
Well, that's sort of the case, but they've developed an awful lot since they bought it. But the DaVinci Resolve used to cost about £750,000 for a full-on grading system.
£750,000.
That's right. But and it was used, extensively in Hollywood for a huge amount of feature film production. But reading between the lines, they sort of got into trouble. They didn't adapt their model fast enough, and Blackmagic bought the intellectual property and the rights for less money than they probably wanted to get for it all, and they're using it as a way of promoting their hardware, and
Right.
it was the first thing they brought in the proper film world, and now of course they've got cinema cameras. They're putting together a portfolio of linked
Very
products, which is. And they've totally changed the market for colour correction. It's amazing how. I mean, you can still buy a £23,000 panel, which like that, which will let you control it, and a lot of £20,000. A colourist would want to use something like this. If you watch a colourist work on something like this, it really is quite a marvel to behold. There's, it's like an artist or like a musician playing the colour, and they can set it up and tune colours very, very quickly with that sort of panel. So they're still selling that for £20,000. So there's still some high-end elements. But you can just use your mouse wheel. You don't have to have this incredible panel. It's just a method of subtle control.
I am using this basically on my laptop and on my desktop computer. Now, because it uses the graphics card, and I use our cheap laptop. I don't use our most expensive laptop, which has got 2 graphics cards and runs this really, really well. I use the cheap one, and it doesn't play it back in real time because it's doing all the effects on the graphics card, but it still works. And I can still grade stuff with it, and it's a lot easier to sit on the sofa and do it that way. Ideally, I'd want to pump it out to a TV, so you need a Blackmagic card onto it. Now at home, on the laptop, I use that. This thing, which is the Shuttle, which is £129 plus VAT, and that runs off my laptop and feeds my TV quite happily. Of course, when it comes to grading, then you really want a proper grading monitor, like your Panasonic screen there, because although my 50-inch is very, very nice, that's not properly set up, and this one is. Having said that, that's 2800.
No, about 2300.
2300.
Yeah, it's it's a full-on professional monitor.
But Richard setting this down for the open day on Friday, and I just loved it.
Yeah,
it's because when you come to the grading, I spend so much time fiddling around with it, and you want to have something standard to use as a setup for it, so that you know what you're doing is good. Because the last thing you want to do is grade it all entire on the computer screen, and then you come to watch it out on a monitor, it doesn't look anything like it.
That's right.
So yes, I mean, there are high definition grading screens out there, but obviously they cost you a bit of adoption. But the actual software, like I said, is written. There's more stuff in it. So I mean, for example, this one is a shot that I quite like. I just did it in the back garden on my ordinary lens. I just put a quick grade on that. But if I come in here and actually zoom into that, I've zoomed into that quite a bit. Let's move it over. That spider moves in the middle there. So it's a bit stuttery because it's not playing it perfectly off the hard drive there. But you can see that's zoomed into about, that's 1.8 times zoomed in on a shot which is 2400 by 1350. And it zooms in very well. It just looks really nice. There's a lot more to play with. And like I said, I'm just getting gorgeous quality out of it. The scaling on this is very good. So I mentioned that Edius, I think, does the best scaling of any editing program. This does the same kind of scaling. And in fact, for my Avid customers, where I said I think Avid's a bit rubbish at downscaling from high def to standard def, I'd suggest they take it out, pop it into this, downscale it, and then make a DVD out of it that way. Because actually this talks really well to Avid. As you'd expect, this is used by broadcasters, so it actually talks really well to people who are using who are actually broadcasting, using a program like Avid's being used for broadcast. So the things about it, obviously you're going to have to learn a bit when you start using it. Read the instructions is another thing I would suggest, because I started reading it and where are the scopes? Yeah,
there you go.
So you see, looking at that, and I wanted to go for a shot that was a bit more neutral. Let's go for that one. And I go automatic. Now you're thinking about that, what kind of colour casters you've got on it. Looking at these three things here, you've got the reds, the greens and the blues. And to get that to be a totally neutral colour, what you do is you look at these and you make sure these graphs all match. So in this case, obviously the blues there, they don't quite match the greens because they're a bit lower down. So I'm going to come down to the gain on the blues and then pull those up a bit. And let's see, a bit more green, a bit less green. So just fiddle around with that, and then fiddle around with the middle bit. And you kind of line them up so they all look the same, and then you've got a properly balanced shot.
Right.
And I've learnt that from the instructions. So yes, I think the instructions are actually pretty good on this, and I definitely, they're there on the website, download them and then read them. There's quite a lot of it.
Very couple of pages on there.
Yeah.
There's some very good YouTube tutorials and just getting you started. So
It's a luxury to have instructions, isn't it? Unlike Viz Title, but there's no instructions.
Yes, yeah.
Well, they have got instructions, but they're not very good, are they? Whereas I thought the instructions on this were very good.
Yeah.
They're Chinese English, yeah. I mean, that's why you need other people to make tutorials on
You
it.
need your Mandarin sharpened up.
Yeah. But it's I say it's a very good program. I definitely get out and have a play with it. Be prepared to be scratching your head a bit and a bit fed up with it to start off with, because the hard stuff is making sure it's set up properly and getting your edit into it, and then getting your edit out to the end. But yeah, it works in better colour space. It does everything in good quality. You'll get better results than you would inside of Edius. or Premiere or anything else. Adobe have got their own grading program which is called SpeedGrade. And what they've just done with that, I was going to talk about Premiere later on, is they made it easier to get from Premiere to SpeedGrade. But I personally still prefer Resolve. It's been around longer. It's also used by loads of places. It's used by lots and lots of people for professional feature films and that sort of thing.
I saw a demo once of Final Cut Pro where different parts of the film were all slightly different, and they've got a sort of a common grade throughout. Can you do the same sort of thing, or are you just grading it individually, clip by clip?
Well, you either have local grades or remote grades, actually. So if you are on, you right-click on a particular clip and you can choose between a local grade and a remote grade. Now, the difference is, if you're on a remote grade, then if you have a clip that comes from the same media, so it's one shot all the way through. Once you've done one, you've done everything.
Right.
So it then affects every time you've used a bit of that media all the way through. If you're on local grades, it's a different one per shot. There's also loads of ways. If you're on a shot and you want to copy a grade to something else, you just select the shot you want the grade on, go to the original, click on the middle mouse button, and it copies the grade across.
Right.
You can also
do Edius where you do sort of.
Yeah, it's just its own way of doing it.
Mixed.
And there's loads of stuff like that. You can save stills out of it so that you can actually have different stills which then have grades which you can apply to it. So yes, there's tons of stuff like that. The one thing I haven't found is I want a colour match filter as well.
Right.
Which there's lots of shots where you can get them next to each other and then you can do it manually, but I haven't found out how to colour match on it yet, which I'd really like. Because I find after spending the evening grading and then maybe having a bit of wine and everything else, it looks good then, and then the next day it doesn't look as good, So sometimes I want something that just automatically corrects me from being rubbish.
Are you red or white wine?
I'm red wine, that's your fault.
Yeah, white would be neutral, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That switched to wine.
Or rosé, because I'm doing a happy movie.
So that's Sony, obviously, to Don Rosé for their colour.
So yeah, I'm going to put some. So I'll put some on the website as well, because I've got quite a few tutorials on my website now. So I'm going to put some more on Resolve now that version 10 has come
What's
out.
the address of your website?
It's dvc.uk.com.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
That one. And if you go on there, it's all under where is it? I should know, shouldn't I? I do this. Free training videos. So if you go to there, plus I've got a YouTube channel now, so it's all on there, which is where this is being broadcast. But then you go to Edius and you've got all the stuff about Viz title and all that sort of thing. So this is all done. It's all on YouTube, and I just embedded it into the site.